What's up, everybody? I am Kevin Ioli. Thank you for joining me. On Monday, there was some bad news in the boxing world. It was kind of the worst news any boxing promoter could ever get. Less than 2 weeks before a scheduled pay-per-view, one of the main event fighters got hurt and had to be pulled out of the fight. You probably heard by now that Keith Thurman, the former welterweight champion who was scheduled to fight Tszyu at 154 pounds. Tszyu was the WBO super welterweight champion. They were supposed to fight on the first Prime Video pay-per-view show for the PBC on March 30th in Las Vegas. Keith Thurman ends up injuring a bicep, had to pull out of the fight. So that is the absolute worst situation that a promoter can find himself in, because this close to a pay-per-view, you're really stuck. There's nothing you can do to recapture the show and put as good a show on as you had in the first place. But to their credit, the PBC and TGB promotions, they did a pretty good job of keeping the show together. Now, I have some issues, and that's what this video is about, and we will go into that in a second. But I want to start by talking about the idea to put Thurman versus Tszyu on pay-per-view in the first place. This is the first fight card that you're going on Amazon Prime Video. You're going to start not with a regular streaming fight that was available to all Prime Video subscribers, but you're making people pay extra to get this particular fight. How do you start with a fight that probably under the best of circumstances wouldn't have done 100,000 on pay-per-view and probably was only going to do about 75,000? If you're Amazon, don't you want to put your best foot forward for your first pay-per-view and go with a really big fight? You have to go out there with a massive fight to say to people, hey, we are now in the marketplace. This is what you can expect from us. You are going to see big fights from us all the time. That, to me, would have made sense. Instead, they went with Keith Thurman versus Tszyu. An interesting fight, but Keith Thurman is a guy that has fought once in 4 years going into this fight. He last fought in 2022, and before that, he had last fought in 2019. So Keith wasn't active. His name wasn't out there. He had never fought in this weight class, and now you're asking him to fight Tszyu on pay-per-view. That just was a recipe for disaster from a business standpoint. That was not going to sell pay-per-view whatsoever. That was not going to sell. Now, what did they do? They really were faced with a tough situation because in respect to the fighters, you've got to try to keep the card together, right? So they ended up taking Sebastian Fundora, who was supposed to be fighting Serhii Bohachuk on the undercard, and that fight was for the WBC title. And what they did was they took Sebastian Fundora and they put him in the main event. So the new main event is going to be Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora. Okay, now there's a couple issues with that. Number one, in his last fight, Sebastian Fundora was knocked out. Now, I understand that this is a dire circumstance and it's not the fight that they put together in the first place. But now you have a guy coming off a 7th round knockout where he was counted to 10. He was counted to 10. He was out. It wasn't like a referee stoppage where he could say, oh, the referee stopped that a little quickly. He was counted out to 10. Now he's in the main event. And what do you know? He's fighting not for one title, but 2 titles. It's for the WBO and the WBC Super Welterweight Championship. A guy that got knocked out. This is crazy. This is insane. How are you doing this? Now we go into Serhii Bohachuk. I give Tom Loeffler and the PBC people a lot of credit. Tom Loeffler of 360 Promotions promotes Bohachuk. Bohachuk looked like he might be the odd man out. So they ended up working a deal to make Bohachuk fight Brian Mendoza, the fighter who knocked out Sebastian Fundora. Okay, that's a fine fight, and I applaud them for putting that on, and I'm glad that the training efforts that those gentlemen put in was not wasted. But now what do we find out? That this is for the interim WBC Super Welterweight title. So what are you doing, Mauricio Suleiman, the president of the WBC? Now we have, on the undercard, we have a interim WBC Super Welterweight title fight. And then in the main event, we have a WBC Super Welterweight title fight. So the same belt is being given out twice on one night. Does that make sense to you? It certainly doesn't make sense to me. And that's just treating the sport ridiculously, right? I would understand, and I think Loeffler had a lot of argument and to say, hey, my guy, since he was going to fight for the title, he's losing the title opportunity. Give him and make him the mandatory if he wins, or make the winner of his fight the mandatory. So I agree the winner of Mendoza Bohachuk, hey, had a strong argument to say I should be the mandatory for the WBC winner of Tszyu versus Fundora. But that's not what happened. The winner of Bohachuck versus Mendoza is going to be given a belt. And how can we do that and make people take this sport seriously? We're giving the same belt away twice. Do they give, I have a Lombardi trophy, a replica Lombardi trophy back behind me over my shoulder. Do they give that Lombardi trophy out twice on one night? Do they give an interim Lombardi trophy and then the regular Lombardi trophy? No, they don't. You have to have credibility in the sport. People have to buy the sport as credible, and there has to be logic to it. And it just doesn't make any sense to give the same belt out twice. So let's get to the thing here. I think when Amazon, once they finally saw what was happening, they wanted to keep the show on. And my guess is Amazon did not have budget. And so they basically said to Al Heyman and the PBC, hey, we can do pay-per-views for you, but we don't have budget to put money toward a show, to buy a show to put it on our air. So Heyman was either going to go in his own pocket and pay to put this on regular streaming and not ask people to pay, or they had to go to pay-per-view. So they chose to go to pay-per-view, but to me, that is really a bad choice. It's going to look bad on Amazon because it's going to bomb. It's going to do no sales. I mean, you watch, this is going to, there will be no pay-per-view buys on this show. And it's a fun fight card. I think in a lot of ways, Fundora versus Tszyu is a better fight than Thurman versus Tszyu. I think it's an interesting fight. And there's a lot of good fights on the card. I really look forward to the co-main event, Rolly Romero versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz. I think that's going to be a fun fight. I think there's some good fights on this show. It's a card worth watching. But I don't think it's a card that you can ask people to pay for. And this is the kind of crazy thing that happens in boxing. And I think we need to stop these things and start fixing them and come up with problems. Fundora does not deserve to be fighting for a title. Let's just be honest here. You get knocked out your last fight. Okay, let's make him fight Tszyu in the main event. But there's no titles at stake. It's an unfortunate situation that happened with Keith Thurman getting injured. Make the best of it. Put Fundora in the fight. It creates a good, interesting fight, but it doesn't need to be for a world title. And then you have the same world title going at stake a little bit earlier on the card. It's just a bunch of nonsense, and I think it erodes public credibility in boxing. And so I hope for boxing's sake that we learn from this. Unfortunately, I've been covering boxing long enough, and I know that we're not going to learn from it, and that the promoters and the sanctioning bodies are going to do these crazy things, and they're going to keep putting these kind of things on, and it's just to the detriment of the sport, right? I have no problem with saving the show. I have no problem keeping the card together. But I think we have to think about the public, and we have to think about the credibility of the sport that we are supposedly promoting. And you can't just give titles out to anybody. And Sebastian Fundora at this point did not earn a title shot. And God bless him for stepping up and taking on Tszyu in short notice. And God bless Tszyu, and congratulations to you, Tszyu, taking on a tough fight like this after he's taken on a bunch of other fights. So Tszyu really is a warrior. He'll fight anybody, anywhere, and he is proving that, right? But we can't make these kind of fights title fights. Come on, folks, learn a little bit from this. Anyways, March 30th, we'll still be on in Las Vegas on Amazon Prime Video pay-per-view. Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora in the main event. Rolly Romero versus Isaac Cruz in the co-main event. I will see you there. Enjoy the fights, everybody.